Heavenly Father, God, we just come before you this morning and pray for the impact of your scripture, the impact of the words that I honestly believe you spoke through Dr. Martin Luther King, that Linda shared, and just allow all of those things to meet us in different ways, in the ways that would be the most impactful to each one of us, and that would lead us and encourage us to a life that, as we describe, is described as worthy of the gospel. A life that Paul sought to emulate, a life that I know each one of us really seek to exhibit and use as reference for the changing of lives and the changing of communities. Lord, as we just go through your text, as we sort of reflect, and as I seek to at least bring some sort of thought to the table, I just dedicate this time to you and seek, once again, just your spirit to meet us in this moment and meet us in this place wherever we are, whenever we're watching this, and just use, your imperfect people to just show your perfect power and your perfect love and your perfect grace. Amen. Well, good morning as well from me. We have a habit of saying good morning a lot, and we mean it a lot, so that's kind of part of it. So if you think, oh man, another person's welcoming me, we really mean it. And I think if all, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us could say welcome and we're happy you're here, we would. We're really thankful for the people who are sharing these welcome messages, like Hannah, that if you missed it, she started the service. You can check that out after this is done later, and we repost it. But we've had just different people from the community sharing a welcome message and really kind of, in an awesome way, welcoming us from wherever they're at. If it's geographically, like Hannah's in Georgia, or, where they're at in their faith journey, where they're at in their St. James journey. Some people are newer, some people have been here forever. And it's just, in my opinion, just an awesome way to really exhibit what the church is, even if we're not all physically in this place. So once again, welcome. And if you haven't done a video or are thinking, do they even care what I think? We do. And, we'd love for you to really email us and reach out. And it makes us so happy every time we see someone else welcome the service that we haven't seen in now 5 months, more possibly. And, it's just, again, just one of those small things that has such a big impact and more than we realize, I think. So anyway, as I began sort of reflecting on this text and this whole journey, someone said something to me, and people say this to me a lot, and if you believe this, it's okay. I'm not saying it's not true. But they said, James, you are just so relaxed, and you are so chill, and you just go with the flow, and your temperament is just so smooth, and I'm always, and I strive to have that type of temperament, and I strive to be that person. And I think having that sort of flexibility and love and support is what we should do. But in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking yeah, I don't know about that. You don't know about this, and you don't know about that. And so, as I was sort of, sometimes I have to go before God and kind of confess, am I lying when I come off like this? And I had this moment, and it was just, one of those human moments where you're there are things that drive us all crazy. There are things that's different for each person that just set us off sometimes and frustrate us and, pull us out from that calm and that peace, and honestly can cause us to be annoyed or angry, to judge other people, and really to step out of, that chill and that calm and that just place that I think as we do centering prayer, as we, have all of these intentional, contemplative moments that we really seek to be. Because when we're at that place, we're so much more perceptive to the Spirit and the God who's right in front of us. But, we have these moments that just unfortunately kind of, yank us out of that. And I have found, though, in a way that God just uses whatever junk I have in my life to somehow glorify Him. These moments always begin this introspective journey. I don't know the condition of the people's hearts who are saying things or doing things. I don't know anything about that. But I'm aware of my own. And so when I have an issue, all of a sudden, I'm just like, oh no, here we go, because now God's going to lead me in some journey that I learn more about myself. I learn more about God. I learn more about the world that we're living in. And, I get closer to, being that really effective person who can, in a sense, really reflect Christ to our church, to our community, to our nation, and all of those things. And it's kind of like a theme, because it's funny, Mark had no idea what I'm preaching on. We have this awesome culture here at St. James that the music and the message and the graphic are very disjointed sometimes. And so Mark will send a text saying, hey, what do you think about this? And normally it's like nail on the head, and it's like ripples. Yeah, I didn't even think about that example, but that's perfect because there is that effect of the gospel. But anyway, long story short, these journeys have a way of really bringing wisdom and bringing us, in a sense, to be more the people God created us to be versus the beginning of the journey where we were struggling and judging and doubting and all of this stuff. And these are very related now. This season that we're in, and being a church and wanting to actually encourage and not just shut our doors for the next year. We've been spending a lot of time on social media, and we've been seeking to use social media better, as kind of this medium to do ministry and to post sermons or messages and graphics and create communities and all of this stuff. And so I've been reading, responding, and looking for better ways to share our ministry. And this might be surprising, but in that social media exploration, I discovered one of those things that I found to be a bit annoying, a bit frustrating, and in turn, it began one of those journeys. And this journey is not just during the writing of this sermon. This journey is probably longer than it should have been, because some of us are really dense and we don't get the message right away. But as I'm scrolling through Instagram and, or whatever, in the midst of all of these vacation photos, these pictures of, big, nice houses, that kind of like picturesque family shot that people like to post, the nice cars and all this other really cool stuff and, really exciting things for the poster, obviously. There was this hashtag that I saw, and again, I confess that reaction was not correct. So don't think I'm saying this is wrong or anything, but I saw it, and the hashtag was #blessed. So, and I'm not making this up. You can, don't do it now. After the sermon, you can search this thing, and you can begin your own journey if you want, but I'm just warning you, God's going to take you somewhere if you have the reaction that I did. And it wasn't so much the word or the sentiment, of these things being blessings, because I'd consider many of these things to be a blessing. It was just something else. It was something, that I've now found to be this feeling of lack of depth, maybe, to a word that I attributed a lot of depth to. Maybe a feeling of incompleteness. And like I said, I do admit that I knew nothing of the story behind any of it, and certainly, don't pretend to know the condition, of anyone's heart who was posting these things. But it more so took that moment as a sort of challenge for myself, because I'm trying to be more out there, and I'm trying to bring the church more out there, and asking myself what images, or reflections of my life am I pushing out there and allowing to be seen. And that really gets us to, the beginning point of this all with this scripture. And we've been doing this sermon on Paul and Paul's writings, and you can look, I think, for the last 2 weeks, James talked about a different writing of Paul, and so it's one of those loose series, but kind of comes together at the author, which is Paul, and his life. And so, if you haven't checked those out, I encourage you to check those out. But I really enjoy Paul. Paul is controversial beyond belief. If there's anyone in the Bible that's more controversial, I guess I'd be surprised, but Paul is, you read one book, you're like, yes, Paul. You read another book, you're like, Paul, come on. You've cursed us to an eternity of theological debate because you didn't specify something in this thing. Anyway, but Paul, by his own admission, was not a perfect man. He didn't do perfect things all his life. And in fact, a large portion of his life, he did things that, in his own words, granted him the term the chief of sinners, the highest of all sinners. Yet despite this, his life and writings impacted and continue to impact the lives of countless people, showing them a God who was not so separate from them or only accessible sometimes because of the law, but present and right beside them always because of love. So today we're beginning in the book of Philippians, chapter 1, verses 21 through 30. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me. Yet which shall I choose? I cannot tell. I am hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. Conceived of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that is in me you may have ample cause to glory in Christ Jesus because of my coming to you again. Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or I'm absent, I may hear of you and that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything or by any opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. And we're not going to dive deep into every possible facet of this because there's a lot there. But just kind of looking at it from sort of a high level before we hit the main sort of crux of this, there's so many relatable things in the text. And I think as we sort of kick into this worthy of the gospel concept, Paul has a lot of, what at least I interpret as these experiences and struggles with his life, even trying to exemplify this, and the depth between it. The beginning reflection, he goes into this really honest moment where he says, I'm pretty tired of doing all this. Paul has done so much by this point, and he's weighing, is it better to be with Christ, and to move on, or to stay really here for the people and being there for their ministry and to encourage them? And he says, honestly, I'm tempted because to be with Christ would be better. But then later on he says, but I know what I need to do is actually remain steadfast here and continue in my ministry and continue, in a sense, serving these churches, other people, and just a real sort of sacrificial moment of, again, this is interpretation, but a guy saying, it's been so long, I'm so tired, I've struggled so much. I know when I am in the presence of my God and with Jesus again, it's going to be so great, so peaceful, so glorious, and that's attractive to me. But I realize God is saying it's not that time yet. There's so much more you need to do and so much more lives you need to impact. And so I'm going to stay and keep going. Paul could have skipped that whole section and not been honest and just said, hey, it's Paul, I'm here to encourage you, listen to this text. But he sets the stage a bit differently. And so like I said, what stood out is this phrase, only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel. So whether I come and see you or whether I remain absent, whether Paul's there or whether he's not, doesn't matter. I should hear that you are standing firm in one spirit with one mind by contending side by side for the faith of the gospel and not being intimidated in any way by your opponents. So Paul's admitting it's not easy. Linda's reading from Dr. Martin Luther King, and that sentiment, again, we don't talk, just nail on the head, moments. I'm telling you, I'm not trying to sell you a faith that is easy or a faith that in this world you will be guaranteed blessings, earthly blessings at least. I'm telling you, just like Christ suffered, I suffer. Just like I suffer, you will suffer. And so this idea of standing firm has that much more power. And the people that Paul was writing to, the people in this Philippian church, doing some high-level research. I don't do a lot, but when I do it, God is like, boom, look at that. That's important. The people in the Philippian church were somewhat, I think, similar to people in Northern Virginia. They were in this city that was actually made a Roman colony and given all of these rights and preferential treatment, compared to other cities in the area. And so they had influence. They were, in a city that was very close to or influencing the seat of power, but not living in the seat of power itself. And so that's like a certain kind of person or people group that develops in those areas. So many of the people were people of power or people who interacted with or influenced people of power. And with that comes a number of different things. Things like wealth, things like privilege, things like position. Also people who have none of those things. And so you have this sort of inequality, but also this temptation of pride from the people who have. And as I think anyone who is here geographically with us, it's not easy living in a place that has worldly power. Being a person who has worldly power and influence can not only be impacted by pride, but also the fear of missing out, fears about image, self-image, or standing, fears of comparison. A very, wise poet said the phrase, "Mo money, mo problems." And I think that fits really, it's timeless, and it fits, the more that you have sometimes, the more that you're consumed with having more and consumed with keeping it. And so I guess I'm just trying to set the picture that not all of these people receiving this letter were going to be people who were, impoverished or people who were not part of this Roman system. Some of them had influence, some of them had power, some of them had wealth. And so if we sort of think about that comparison and that standing and that meaning from a lot of these other things, we have this sort of phrase in today's context, if you don't document it, or if you don't get a picture, or you don't get a video, of whatever it is in your life, it doesn't count. If you don't post it, it doesn't count. And Paul had a special place in his heart for these people because, again, the more you learn about Paul, the more you see that he really related to people like that. The diversity of the disciples that Jesus empowered, was very much on purpose. Paul wasn't a fisherman. Paul was a Pharisee. He was an academic, and he was not only a religious leader, but a leader in the community. He had plenty of reasons to be proud of his life for his accomplishments. His influence, his nice clothes, his titles, his powerful friends, you name it. Things that would certainly merit that blessing hashtag. I sort of mused a little bit, about Paul's Instagram account, and, it says something like, "Just checked into the 5-star Jerusalem West End Hotel for the Biblical Interpretation Conference. Hashtag Pharisee life. Hashtag serving God. Hashtag blessing." It's funny because, it's kind of hits home for some of us. But worth noting, after encountering Jesus and having his conversion and dedicating his life to preaching the gospel, he doesn't actually stop mentioning any of these accomplishments. But what he does, though, is tell the whole story. The accomplishments and extraordinary adventures he shares that are that much more extraordinary because of the journey that led to that moment. The struggles, the difficulties, the failures, the successes, all of it leading to the moment as he writes this letter or, writing this post. So then really, what is a life worthy of the gospel? Looking at Paul's life and spending time reflecting on this statement, one way I feel it can be summed up is this. A life worthy of the gospel is a life that depicts the gospel. A life that reflects the glory of the Creator, the love of the Creator, the sacrifice of the Creator, and the grace of the Creator. I'm just going to read that again because if you take anything from this, I hope it's this. A life worthy of the gospel is a life that depicts the gospel. a life that reflects the glory of the Creator, the love of the Creator, the sacrifice of the Creator, and the grace of the Creator. The gospel is a story of the desperate need for Jesus, a loving God we can't quantify or fully understand, and that God's answer and resurrection to each one of us, undeserved, and an opportunity to use that overall experience and smaller experiences which echo these moments of our lives to connect, to encourage, and to create community. The way Paul describes it is striving side by side with one mind for the faith of the gospel. And this certainly is not easy. As we seek not only to depict that gospel in our lives, our words, our social media posts, it's definitely way more comfortable to just tell people the good stuff. The end. We want them to know that we are good, successful people. Maybe they won't listen to us, or maybe they'll see us in a different light if they knew our struggles, if they knew our pasts. And what Paul and what I probably would say is, you're right. They might not. But I challenge you to consider if someone knew the whole story, not only the end with the nice house or the successful business or the successful ministry, if they knew the human being, imperfect, who struggled, who made bad decisions, and logically speaking, should not be sitting where you're sitting right now. If they knew that whole story, they might think differently about you. Or maybe they wouldn't. But they certainly would think differently about God. Paul also wrote, "Because he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me.'" I'm going to read that again. "But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me.'" A life depicting the gospel, I see as one of those sort of like before and after images, maybe more in between. Like when someone has, lost a lot of weight or recovered from some serious illness, and maybe some other huge transformation took place. It took work, it took commitment, it took faith in a lot of cases. And you see this one image where they were at, and then another image about where they are. And the power of that statement isn't the end image itself. It's the difference that's found in the two, in the transformation. And without the before, we can't fully actually understand or see the real value of the after. This weekend, as I said, I'm living on social media these days or something, and I saw the news and I saw the post about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she was a Supreme Court justice who passed away. And as I sort of thought about it and, sort of just reflected, on who she was, her life undoubtedly had an incredible last phase. She was literally a Supreme Court justice. But even more incredible was her journey. A journey that can encourage, that can challenge us, and that can empower us. So the headline might have said, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies, blah, 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 whatever. But as I read more, it really was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a Supreme Court justice whose father was an immigrant, who lost her older sister at age 6, whose mother died before she graduated high school, who was rejected professionally and not taken seriously because she was a woman, who was demoted when she had a child, who fought for gender equality representing both men and women, who battled cancer for over 20 years. All this while she both directly and indirectly shaped the laws and their interpretation in our country. I mention all this to say there is a difference between saying that whole statement and more, or merely that she was a Supreme Court justice. The power and the impact of the story is in the details. It's in the journey. It's not bad to be #blessed or share accomplishments or good things that happen to us. It's not bad to post new cars or new jobs or family photos. It's not bad to share our gifts. And, if we're good at music, if we're good at writing, it's not bad to share all of that stuff. But a life that depicts the gospel, a life Paul is encouraging the Philippians and us to live, is one that not only shares all of those things, but shares the full story. Shares the struggle with the success, the hurt with the joy, the imperfections and inadequacies, to highlight God's power and impact in our lives. All this to lead others to that relationship when they are feeling inadequate. Ever since someone told me this, it always happens to me. They said, whatever you struggled with, whatever past you had to overcome, whatever issues you had and that you were able to work through and God was able to heal you of, or however you want to say it, those are the type of people you will find yourself interacting with that need your experience to encourage them. The outcome might not be the same, but just having someone who understands is huge and impactful. And I do not like being honest about bad stuff. I love everything to work out good and everything to be nice and like singing the right notes even though I don't, and all that stuff. But it's super encouraging. And personally, I'm on this very long journey about getting better with music as an example and things like that. And I heard this. I met him. I lived with his best friend, and there was this guy who was the lead singer of a band that was pretty well known, I guess. And he was talking, and he basically, said, before all of this success and before all of this fame, I literally tried to lead worship in a church, and they told me I wasn't good enough. They told me I didn't have the skill. I couldn't. I really, this is not my gifting, and I would never do it. And so the journey that took place from that moment to literally being a famous musician and singer-songwriter had so much power for me. There's other things that I've been through that people come to me and say, oh, my brother had this issue or I have this issue. And I'm like, oh, all right, God, fine, I'll be honest and share what's going on in my life. And so I just encourage you, as there is the temptation to just share the after, to just share the good, to just share the end result. See the power of a life that actually depicts the gospel and shares the journey. And you don't need to share your life story with every person every time. But seek to share how the gospel is at work and the ripple, like the image, of encouragement, empowerment, and impact the journey between the before and the present has in our homes, our churches, our communities, our cities, our states, our nation, and our world. We look at people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Dr. Martin Luther King and Paul even, and just this impact that just keeps, really encouraging us and strengthening us. And it wasn't just because she was a Supreme Court justice, or it wasn't just because, Martin Luther King said this one speech that was really awesome. It was the journey. It was the being in jail. It was the battling cancer. It was the struggle that just really can change the world. So as you go, I just encourage you to, as you share posts or as you share things or as you really represent yourself to others, to really seek to depict that life that not only is worthy of the gospel, but that really is living the gospel and reflecting the gospel.